From the Asgard Company Studios in beautiful Wichita Falls, Texas, from the finest mind in the modern fitness industry, the one true voice in the strength and conditioning profession, the most important podcast on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, starting Strength Radio. Welcome back to Starting Strength Radio. This week, we are fortunate to have as our guest Stan Efferding. You all know Stan. You all love Stan. We are appreciative of Stan's time here. Stan is a major contributor to what used to be called physical culture these days. And, I don't think that's a terribly bad term, physical culture. That's what... I think that's what Grimmick would have called it, wouldn't he?
I think so. We used to call it human movement studies back in the 80s.
Yeah, but physical culture incorporates, more than just movement. It's diet and exercise and
Agreed.
Lifestyle and, Muscle Beach and all kinds of things like that aren't exactly described as exercise or movement studies. So anyway, we're gonna talk today with Stan about all kinds of things. Stan has got a book called The Vertical Diet, and I want to had I prepared enough for this show, I would have had one here on the desk, but I didn't think about it till just about 5 seconds ago. So maybe Rusty can cut that cover into the shot.
I can totally do that.
In what we call post production, and show everybody Stan's book. So Stan, let's start with that. That's as good a place as any to start. Hold it. No, let's don't do that. Let's do chronology. Stan, how long have you been doing this kind of shit?
Oh my goodness! Many of us, we started lifting those Weider weights. Remember the plastic-covered, concrete-filled weights back in when we were teenagers.
Yes.
With that little thin bar that would bend if you tried to put all the weight on it.
Right.
That tiny little bench that was about the width of a pencil that you would lay on to do your bench press.
I think it was an 8-inch bench.
Yeah, and I would get no results, of course, because I was 14 years old. But I really fell in love with it was in college. I finally got to touch some weights with some folks that kind of knew what they were doing, and I just became obsessed with it. So I started competing, and I should say when I got to college in 1985, I was 135, 140 pounds. I had been a wrestler in high school, 98 pounds as a freshman and sophomore, 106 as a junior, 115 as a senior. I was quite a skinny kid, and so
that was the result of wrestling coach disease.
Yeah,
those people are harmful. I'm telling you,
It is one of the hardest sports I've ever done. There's no question about it.
But it's not good for your brain. It's the male equivalent of ballet, because ballet teachers have the potential and quite often do the same kinds of damage that wrestling coaches do.
Yeah,
but it's
I work
part
with
of society, so
I work with a lot of young athletes now, and their parents reach out to me, and I'm cautious about over restriction. That's not the age at which to be trying to make weight classes. I think that inhibits and potentially stunts growth. So, fortunately, I got into lifting in college. I was still quite skinny, but I fell in love with it. I had a soccer scholarship for college, and I just abandoned it. I told Coach I found something else to do, and so I started lifting, started competing in 1988. Won the Mr. Oregon in 1991, and went on to compete in junior nationals and throughout the early and mid 90s. And I always felt as though the stronger I got, the bigger I would get. Of course, now we know different, particularly in terms of like the 1-rep maxes. But back then, I would just lift as heavy as I could, as often as I could, with being able to keep building weights with recovery. And I ended up getting very, very strong. And so I started competing in powerlifting as well. So I would go back and forth. I would diet down to single-digit body fat to compete on a bodybuilding stage, and then I would eat everything I could to bulk up to become as big and strong as I could to compete as a powerlifter. And then I would repeat that over and over again, back and forth. And I
Isn't
learned
it odd how that's always worked?
Yeah, I learned a lot of lessons along the way, though. I made a lot of mistakes. I dirty bulked and got heavier than I should have, and fatter than I should have, and more unhealthy than I should have. And then I would over extremely calorie restrict and lots and tons of cardio, and I would lose way more muscle than I should have. And so it was a good foundation to learn those lessons that throughout my career I was able to refine and now teach others.
Had I only known then what I know now, how many of us have said that?
All of us. It's fantastic. And I appreciate that. Even after I got done competing, Rip, as you recall, I was trying to attach some science to my anecdotes, my N of ones, and and my testimonials from people I'd worked with over the years, and my collaborations with other athletes. But and that's when I came to your seminar, and I started to learn more about. Obviously, I studied exercise science in college, but what you learn in the '80s and what I learned, from you is a completely different world. And I partnered with a PhD in exercise phys, who's an RDN and former director of dietetics from UNLV, and we spent years working out together and hundreds of hours trying to compile this book so I could offload all of the questions that I had been asked over the years into one document, The Vertical Diet. And that happened after all of my years, all of my success, all of my competing. And I don't think I knew what I was doing real time. It wasn't until after the fact and reflecting on.
Oh God, I didn't. The entire 10 years I spent competing in powerlifting, I had no idea what a squat was. I had no idea. It's amazing how many people coached me and you and didn't know what the hell they were doing, and we somehow got kind of strong anyway. Now, isn't that weird?
I agree.
So there's just a few basic principles. Lift heavy weights, eat enough to recover, try to sleep, don't be distracted, that sort of thing. So tell us about...
Those are the big basics, yep.
Tell us about the Vertical Diet. Stan, how well is that sold?
Very well. I've been very fortunate. Between the book, it was a #1 new release on Amazon, and so it was a bestseller there. And then the ebook, even better. The ebook has been distributed. The different variations. I started out with the Vertical Diet 1.0, and then I evolved to the 2.0, 3.0, and now 4.0 over the years. As you know, more and more questions are asked of me, so I expanded upon the information that was in the book, and things change. My opinions change over time based on science and experience. Not dramatically, but I wanted to update that for better information, and I provided each subsequent version free to anybody who bought a previous version. So now we're on version 4.0, but it really evolved as a way for me. Every time someone comes in and asks you a question, you realize that there's 100 things that you'd like them to know and to pay attention to. There's certainly the big basics, but then there's also how do you implement these successfully. And rather than repeating myself over and over again, I decided to actually memorialize it into a document. And I really think everybody should go through that exercise to see, to be able to articulate how they, how they educate people about certain topics, and then be able to support that with, all certainly anecdotes and testimonials, but evidence from science-based work.
That's the way you learn from yourself. You write it down, and then you read it, and you say to yourself, hold on, wait, let me restate that. And then you figure out a better way to say it, figure out a better way to explain it. And, we're in the 3rd edition of the book. I don't think we're going to do a 4th, but what we actually did is every time we would run another printing of the 3rd edition, we'd make little changes. Yeah. And the reason we didn't do a 4th edition, quite honestly, was because of the fact that when you call something another edition at Amazon, which is the basis of book sales in the 21st century, you lose all of your previous comments from the previous edition. So when we went from 2nd to 3rd edition, all the 2nd edition comments zeroed, and we went to no comments at all.
Right.
And we didn't want to do that because we've accumulated quite a high number of 5-star reviews, and I didn't want to lose all of those. So we just made little bitty changes that that dealt with little inconsistencies and that sort of thing, just to rectify things, but not a wholesale change in the explanations.
Right. There's lots of books that have done that. Rather than change the title, you can just go in the front cover and say 4th edition and the date, so people know they're getting the most recent update. And I think that's important.
Third revision. I think we called it a revision.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to call it a new edition. And I don't anticipate a 4th edition of Starting Strength. It's, pretty much everything that we've talked about in the 3rd edition is, especially with the 3rd revision, still valid. So I don't see any point in issuing a 4th edition.
Yeah. Now, the vertical diet is more than just diet. Of course, it does have training. It has cardio and strength training, but it has blood testing. It has nutrition, sleep optimization, and then it's expanded now into a host of other questions of women's menopause, PCOS, a lot of the diet information that I get about keto or intermittent fasting, or so I have entire chapters, veganism, vegetarianism. We have entire chapters addressing what our position is and what the pros and cons are of each of those things, and tries to explain them. Supplementation obviously continues to get updated over the years. And so the expansion is really just to include more information. The thing just grows and grows and grows. Now it's over, I think, 275 pages with more than 300 references to videos, articles, peer-reviewed, published research, stuff that we think is to help people take a deeper dive and maybe understand the topics better.
Well, how many copies of it have you sold? Do you know?
We've sold
hard
over
to keep
40,
track of sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, on the ebook, we've sold over 40,000, and understanding that people commonly will grab ebooks and distribute them without our knowledge, and so I'm not complaining necessarily about that, especially especially the vertical diet 1.0 and 2.0 just came out in PDF, and so they just went viral worldwide, and I had people from all over the world. I mean, I couldn't go to an airport. I've been in 17 countries in all 50 states, and I could hardly travel without people talking to me about that they've read the vertical diet.
Right.
And to me, that was a godsend. Whether I made some money on it or not, just the information and I think just people recognizing the resource and having used it is it's very rewarding. I take this responsibility of being an influencer, if that's what you want to call it, whatever name you want to put on it. But when you start talking to thousands of people, you take, it's a serious business. You want to make sure that you're not giving out bad information. And I've certainly stepped on numerous landmines over the years and have made some revisions. But for the most part, I've worked hard to make sure that I'm not out selling snake oil to folks.
Well, tell us about the vertical diet. What are the basic tenets of the principles or the way things are organized?
Yeah, well, obviously the big rocks are going to be sleep and sleep optimization, and we get into talking about things like sleep apnea, especially amongst large athletes, and its effect on general health. In terms of general health, we do take deep dives into blood testing to making sure that people pay attention to things like metabolic syndrome, blood pressure, lipids, liver and kidney enzymes, all of the things that are associated with good health. For women, that would include things like the female triad for anemia and amenorrhea and hypothyroidism. So we get into a lot of that in detail. And then, of course, exercise, both in terms of cardio and strength training. We go into deep dives into those. And then the nutrition aspect and all of the different variables that go into losing weight. We also talk a lot about gaining weight, but that's a smaller percentage of the population. Even though I still work with a lot of great big athletes, including the current world's strongest man, Mitchell Hooper, is a client of mine. And then, of course, now Hafthor again, as he's come back into powerlifting and strongman. I work with those guys. So there is some weight gain associated questions amongst parents and their high school students trying to play football. So we do have a lot of that, but the vast majority of the customers are still weight loss. metabolic syndrome, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, those kinds of things. Not always just for, this is Gen Pop, this is dad bods and soccer moms, the vast majority of them. It's not just for stage, it's not figure physique, wellness, bikini. I certainly do plenty of that and have done that all the way up to the Olympia level, but the vast majority of people out there are just trying to get some, what I said in the book, simple, sensible, and sustainable recommendations to how to improve their general health and their overall fitness.
Well, what would be the first thing that you would tell somebody that bought the book for weight loss?
Well, I'd tell them
your general demographic that's most interested in your information. What's the first most important thing you would tell them?
The best diet's the one you can follow, and so we have to try and find some sort of nutrition program that seems the least restrictive for them. And there's really only, I said there's many paths to the same destination, but they can all be defined under one of three different categories. Every diet falls into one of these three different categories. And I'll credit Dr. Peter Attia for having labeled these CR, DR, and TR. And CR is calorie restriction. Everybody's familiar with that. You weigh and measure your food. You read labels. You use an app to track calories. That's one very viable path and effective path for many people. That's CR. DR is dietary restriction. That's where we eliminate a food or a food group. This is your keto people eliminating carbs, or your vegan people eliminating meats. It can be your paleo folks, anybody who eliminates a particular dietary food group, macros or otherwise. And then TR is time restriction. And we're familiar with alternate day fasting, or OMAD, one meal a day, or 16-8, or whatever protocol you choose to apply to it, where you just restrict the hours of the day in which you're going to eat food. All three of those work for the same reason. They can create a calorie deficit. Different people are able to adhere to those different diets differently. In studies amongst individuals who participate in those dietary programs, we get a lot of inter-individual variability. Some people lose weight, some people don't. Some people gain weight on each of those different paths. And the research has also shown us that none is any better than the other for long-term dietary adherence. And so I think that's a good thing. Although my clients always tell me, just tell me exactly what to do. I have to be cautious that I don't prescribe a diet plan that they're not going to be able to adhere to. So if you can cut out carbs and not feel overly restricted and overly hungry, then maybe that's a path that you can choose to lose weight, so long as it allows you to maintain a calorie deficit. If you can eat in a time window, then by all means, if that's the least restrictive to you, then do so. And if you like to use an app and weigh and measure your food, that's certainly also an effective way. Different people have different preferences. Right. And so I would want to find a diet program that not only people could lose weight on, because we see from the research that most people who go on diets lose weight, but most people gain it back. And so it's long-term dietary adherence that's most important. And so we embark on a lifestyle that they can sustain long-term. It's not a means to an end. There's no finish line. So we have to try and find out the best diet for them.
Right. What is the vertical part of the vertical diet?
Well, I think that when I kind of devised the program, I wanted it to be a lot about moving. I wanted it to be a lot about building a foundation upon which you could create, just about anything. I think I heard at an Mr. Olympia press conference one year, an athlete said that you can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. That always struck me as relevant for athletes. And you've talked a lot about building up strength and GPP, and such that the demands of the sport could be supported by, your strength, your physical characteristics. And so I wanted to, when we talk about, I say the best diet's the one you can follow, I also have some standard recommendations for building that foundation. I want to use more whole foods, less ultra-processed foods in terms of for satiety. I want to get sufficient protein in daily for lean mass retention, and also for satiety. I want to get a variety of different food sources, protein sources, carb sources, so we satisfy their micronutrient requirements. I talked earlier about anemia or a host of other nutrient deficiencies. So I use the vertical diet to build a foundation upon which I can construct anything, whether it's a general weight loss program or whether it's Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles, playing in a Super Bowl. I want to be able to support that kind of activity with a foundation. So that's the vertical diet.
Well, it's a kind of an interesting departure from the norm in this industry. There, a guy with your kind of powerlifting background and your ability under the bar this is probably the first book I've ever read that was authored by a guy with your background. I mean,
yeah. As mentioned, I partnered with a PhD RDN to make sure that the book was solid scientifically. But these are lessons I learned, and more than once, Rip. As I said, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and you said it. If I knew then what I know now, and I just wanted to memorialize that into a book. I was, all the way up to the Mr. and Miss Olympia level. I've worked with athletes. I've competed as a professional bodybuilder, and like you said, I've competed as a world record powerlifter, and I've had good experiences and bad experiences, both with myself and with my clients, and I've seen the damage that's been done to athletes on both ends of the spectrum. We've seen friends of ours pass away on the bulking end of the spectrum, and we've seen very dramatic health problems amongst female clients dieting down for these bikini shows. And just ending up ultimately on antidepressants and just having horrible health problems as a result. And in athletics as well. I think we recall just a few years ago, a former University of Oregon track coach that was working for Nike had starved one of his distance track athletes to the point where she experienced shin splints and a whole host of other problems, amenorrhea and anemia and health problems, and ultimately ended up in a lawsuit as a result. So there's a lot of bad information out there, and you're right. This is a departure from what has traditionally been what I referred to as the guru diet. And this is when someone comes in and they end up on white fish and tilapia and broccoli and a scoop of protein powder,
stuff like that.
And grapefruit and egg whites. Yeah,
I haven't. I've been doing this now I got to thinking about this. I've been fooling around with this shit for 50 years now, and gone from the traditional starting place with the muscle magazines all the way up to where we are now. And I'm not familiar with a guy with your background in both physique and powerlifting and strength training and aesthetics, having collated all of that stuff into one resource. And that's what's impressive about it, is because you've done the whole thing. And there are very few people with your perspective on this stuff. And that's why I think this is important.
Well, I think that it's not just the what, but the how. And I think that through experience and from asking lots of questions along the way and studying the topics, if I tell somebody you have to get more sleep, it's like, yeah, no shit, I get it. But if I've lived through that experience with them, particularly having kids and competing and traveling, and then talking about things like sleep apnea and resolutions for that, talking about good sleep hygiene, talking about the specific pros and cons associated with that, insulin resistance, muscle loss, a whole host of different things. I want to be able to tell them how to do it. And same with nutrition. There's a lot of what, but there's also a lot of how. I talk about how I used to tote around plastic bins full of food like we all did, our little 6-pack bag with our plastic containers for years. Right. And then I just happened upon using a hot thermos. Now I can travel, 12 hours somewhere and have 3 meals sitting there hot waiting for me. And just things like taking frozen prep meals with me. And this, I've been talking about this for many, many years. And this is what the successful bodybuilder figure physique bikini competitors have been doing for decades. They prep their meals, they take them with them, and so I tried to create some ways that people could do that more efficiently. And I'll tell you a real story. And I think we talked about some of this before. The strongmen would travel internationally, say to Africa or to Europe, etc., and they would start to eat the local food, and they would end up getting food poisoning and lose 10, 12 pounds of water weight and be pissing out both ends and compete very poorly.
Right.
And I spoke about this just within the last year or two. I went down to Arizona to work with the Olympic women's wrestling team. And I worked recently with Kennedy Blades, who was a silver medalist in the Olympics this year in wrestling. And she had a hard time gaining weight, and she traveled a lot. So I flew down to Arizona, and I went to Costco, and I bought her all the food, and I went to and I bought her all the stuff to make it with, the grill and the rice maker with a 24-hour timer on it, and the Ninja grill, and all this. Just showed her the whole process and how it works. And they brought the thermos and say, here's how you're going to make your meals, here's how you're going to pack your meals, here's what you're going to eat. Give her an entire diet. But now you're talking about someone who trains twice a day, goes to school all day. She's a college athlete, doesn't have really a lot of experience in having done this before because she lived at home previously. And so, like I do with all my athletes, I said to Kennedy, I said, okay, starting tomorrow, I want you to send me a picture of all the meals that you eat so I can track this. One, for personal accountability, and two, so I have an opportunity to intervene where necessary, give feedback. And she, for breakfast, she sends me, it's a little chobani with a half a bagel with cream cheese. And God. Obviously that's
she
not the breakfast. It's not a matter of understanding. And I say the same thing in terms of weight loss for people who suffer from obesity. They know what they're supposed to do. They know what's bad for them, ultra-processed fast foods, and Coca-Colas. But implementing a plan is very different. People's habits tend to drive their behaviors during the day. And that was just convenient for her. She was in a hurry. She got up and she had to get to class or get to her first practice at 6 a.m. So that's what she had. And certainly it didn't have the 30 plus grams of protein that I was needing, and it didn't have the sufficient calories. For lunch, it was 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. These are the pictures that I get. Day one, after flying all the way to Arizona and spending the time. And I realized that it's not the information necessarily. It's the execution of the program.
Right.
And so now with her and her schedule, I'm not shilling for my meal prep company, but you can use any meal prep company. But that's what she ultimately did. Is I just sent her the meals prepackaged and ready to go. And then I encouraged her and the coach down in Arizona, for all the athletes that travel internationally, take your food with you for something that important. When you're going to South America or you're going to,
right.
you can't drink the water down there, and so I encouraged them to do that because of how important it is. And sure enough, she went to a competition overseas and posted on Instagram that she was in the hospital with food poisoning. She had not taken her meal, and she had ended up eating something locally. And you only have to learn that lesson once, I guess. Learn it personally.
Some people aren't as coachable as they should be.
Yeah. Well, she's a smart girl. It's the execution. The plans weren't there.
It didn't penetrate.
I've traveled. I've been in 17 countries, all 50 states. Conducted over 200 seminars. I was on the plane almost every weekend for 5, 6+ years there, some years back before COVID. And I would pack 20 or 30 meals, whatever it took for me to get my 3 or 4 meals a day for however long I was gone, 6, 7 days. Sometimes up to 30 meals. I would pack it into a rolling Coleman cooler, and that became my luggage. I would roll that onto the checked baggage, check that in for checked baggage, and then I would take that with me to whatever country I landed in, whether it was Russia or Switzerland or Australia. I've been all over the world. And I would stay someplace with a fridge and microwave. Hopefully a little kitchenette would be optimal. And so I could have my meals, and I had my little thermos. So the next morning when I woke up after flying all day, I would cook 2 or 3 meals, eat 1 for breakfast, put 2 into thermos, go do my work all day, seminars or whatever I was doing while I was traveling, and still have quick access to my meals in my backpack while I traveled. And that's the way I operated that's the way I operated for decades. I didn't have books in my backpack at school and college. I had food, and I would sit in the back of the room and open up my Tupperware full of chicken and hard-boiled eggs. Imagine what that smelled like. And I would sit there in an auditorium full of people, 10 rows in front of me, turning around looking to see what was going on back there.
Yeah.
And I was eating, my chicken breast and hard-boiled eggs. And all I had in my backpack all day long was food. I understood even at that very young age that how important calories were. Calories
well,
are king.
You figured out how to control one of the most important variables that you run into when you travel. Now, a lot of times when we travel, it is fun to eat cool things that occur locally. I'd love to be able to do that. But if you are traveling with the intent of performing in an athletic sense at your destination, you haven't got the option of experimenting with local cuisine. You've got to feed yourself in the way that already is going to produce the performance that you need to do. And
when you hit on something important there, you want to be consistent with what you've been eating historically.
Yes.
This happens with powerlifters a lot and strongmen. They get to the week of the show or the week of the competition, and they start making all these dramatically different food choices, particularly right prior to or post weigh-ins for their refeeds. Or if they travel and they end up eating a lot of the hotel food. Many people remember the videos that I've shot when I would travel and I would take care of Hafthor Bjornsson or Brian Shaw when they were competing abroad for the world's strongest man. And I would get there early and I would go to Costco. We would get an Airbnb for them. The hosts for the event would put them up in a hotel with no kitchenette and the hotel room didn't have any eating service. They said, you can just use the restaurant. And that's, certainly an option, but it's not ideal. And so I would get there a week early and I would go to Costco and I would get everything that they needed or to a butcher and get them specific foods that they needed. And I would stock up their refrigerators and make sure they had everything they needed. And sometimes I would bring in a 6-foot table with a rice cooker and a grill for them to cook in their room if they didn't have an Airbnb and they were in a hotel room with no cooking facilities. One year I even bought a refrigerator and brought it into Hafthor's room at the Arnold Classic because they didn't have cooking facilities there.
Right. So it seems obvious that reducing the number of variables that you encounter when you travel should be an important thing for a person who has something physical to do at that destination. Now, this is not the same. You guys are not going on a vacation if you're going to a meet in Europe. You're not going on a vacation. You should be going on what is merely an extension of what you do on a regular basis at home when you're training. So you don't get to think about it the same way. You have to think about it in terms of maintaining as much of the normal habits that carried you to the qualifying total for the meet in Europe. When you get there, you've got to do the same things that you do at home. You got to eat the same things. You got to try to sleep the same way. You've got to do as many of the same things as possible, as many things as you can control as possible. And if you could control your diet in a situation like that, you've really taken a big step forward in terms of controlling the circumstances under the competition.
Agreed. And you mentioned something else there that's important, and that's the traveling and the sleep. I just talked to Mitchell Hooper about this a couple of weeks ago because he's traveling a lot. He has a very busy schedule, and he produces a lot of content, and so he works hard. He's a hard-working guy. And I told him, I said, you need to at least schedule in your sleep as a priority, meaning maybe you have to fly out a day early just so you can fly during the day rather than ending up landing at 2 a.m. in the morning or having to wake up at 3 a.m. to get to the airport by 5 or 4. If it's a huge departure and you're very close to competition, you just add an extra day to make sure you're traveling during the day and that you can still get a good night's sleep. Bring your CPAP with you if you have apnea and you use that at home. Travel with it. those kinds of things are paramount for performance. I would say, especially getting there early. We always tried to get the strongmen to the competition about a week or 6 days, probably 5 or 6 days early if we could, to let them get acclimated to the environment.
So they're settled into a routine by the time the competition takes place.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yep, that's terribly important. I wonder how many people in the contest don't think about it that way.
I don't know, but every year you hear about it. Every year you hear about, and behind the scenes, of course, because my working with athletes, even doing something as a refeed incorrectly, this becomes hugely important for fighters. I'm worked about the last 2 years with John Jones, the current UFC heavyweight champion, and he didn't have to diet for this fight, but I've worked with other fighters that have had to diet down to make weight, as well as powerlifters who have to diet down to make weight. And it's a pretty extreme process. Sometimes, I'll give you a specific example. Dan Green dieted down. He did a water cut. He weighed 248 pounds, 48 hours before weigh-ins. He weighed in at 220. He lost 28 pounds in 48 hours.
God.
And then within 24 hours, by the time he was on the platform, he was 252 when he hit his world record squat. 252.
That is a bunch of shuttling around in terms of metabolism.
Now, he carries an enormous amount of muscle, and that is the best scenario for dropping water, because a lot of that water is in the muscle and the glycogen storage. But the point of the conversation is that refeed, oftentimes, Larry Wheels ran into this problem when I was working with him. He did the same thing. You'll go weigh in, and then you immediately just start gorging on IHOP or Denny's. Your body cannot assimilate that food, and you end up with this huge bolus of food in your stomach, and you're sick, and it's not replenishing you, and you get diarrhea. That is, the refeed is just as important and just as meticulous and just as calculated and timed out as the water cut, which starts 7-8 days prior to weigh-ins and includes a whole host of different things that you do to cut that water.
Well,
it's
extreme a situation that most of us won't ever find ourselves.
I agree.
In. But in terms of just general advice for the demographic that watches this podcast, which are people that are strength training.
Yeah.
People from all demographics that are strength training that just want to be stronger, that have no real intention of competing or anything. What would you say the most important thing that they can glean from the vertical diet would be?
Yeah, but I think it's first and foremost, like I said, it's about finding a lifestyle that you can sustain, something that's simple, sensible, and sustainable. But then secondly, I think, and part of that is creating those habits. A lot of folks, they have careers, they have families that are a priority over these things, and they can't. I said many years ago that if you create a program that you can't adhere to, you're setting yourself up for failure, and then you just jump ship, you just abandon it altogether.
Right.
We'd rather make small, sustainable changes that people can adhere to long term. So with diet in particular, just getting familiar with the calories in foods. I don't say everybody has to track calories all the time, but you need to become familiar with what foods have lots and lots of calories, because at the end of the day, if you're overeating, you're just not going to be able to lose the weight or maintain the body fat percentage that you want. And an example of that would just be if you go to Starbucks and get a vanilla latte, it's got 700 calories, as opposed to a lower calorie coffee option. You just have to make those decisions. If you go to Cheesecake Factory, their fettuccine Alfredo is 2,200 calories. Or you could get a lean, top sirloin steak salad or salmon salad or something like that, and be in the 400 to 600 calorie range. And even I'll often have people, like on my diet, I do recommend lean steak, lean red meat, particularly for women because of the iron content and the creatine and B vitamins. We talked earlier about the guru diet, and one of the big problems with the guru diet is that it demonizes a lot of foods. It demonizes red meat, it demonizes fruit, it demonizes dairy, it demonizes even salt.
How do you demonize fruit?
Yeah, and the egg yolk demonizes the egg yolk. So you have all these really nutrient-dense foods that are getting demonized, and these women avoid them, and to their own detriment, to their own health detriment. So, but the difference between the foods you prepare at home, let's just say a top sirloin steak from Costco, a 3-ounce steak's 197 calories with, probably 37 grams of protein or so, about that. You eat that same steak at Ruth Chris, and it's probably going to be a ribeye, and it'll have a cube of butter melted on top of it. And you're talking about a 1,600 calorie steak alone.
Right.
Just the steak alone. It'll be a lot larger serving, I'm sure. So people will tell me, they were going to a restaurant, I'm just going to have a steak. I'm like, well, be careful what it's cooked in. That's one of the things to be cautious of. And I'm not trying to demonize whether it's butter or oil or whatever you cook your food in at this point. I'm just saying, recognize that that's going to add hundreds and hundreds of calories to that particular meal. If you consistently are putting a pad or two of butter, or a teaspoon or a tablespoon or two of oil, even a healthy oil like an extra virgin olive oil, what have you, you're still going to add a couple hundred calories to every meal. Do that 3 times a day, that's 600 calories. So you're talking about a significant amount of just added calories. Now, if you cook that same meal, say you steam the vegetables in bone broth, or you use a Ninja grill to, an air fryer style, you can eliminate 300, 400, 500, 600 calories a day simply by what you choose to cook your food in. Again, not a good food, bad food conversation in terms of what you're adding. It's just a calorie conversation. If you weigh and measure your food for a short period of time and use a tracker and pay attention to everything that you put into your meals, you'll recognize that the calories you think you're eating are generally going to be underestimated by as much as 50%.
60%. Yeah, that's probably about right, isn't it?
Yeah, and a large portion of that is just not knowing what a good portion size is.
Yeah.
When you do one serving of peanut butter, it's not a giant ladle full. It's a tiny little, a serving of peanut butter is tiny, and if you actually portioned one out one time and just looked at it, you'd nod your head and be like, oh, okay, I'm not eating what I think I'm eating. I'm eating much more.
Right. Well, Stan, what does your training look like these days? Let's talk
Rip,
about training.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I'm going to.
Oh God, I hope nobody asked me. I'm just. I'm in a horrible jam. I screwed my knee up about 4 years ago, and I'm just on a maintenance kind of a deal. I've got so many injuries. Both shoulders are screwed up, and this left knee has got probably 40% of the extensor mechanism left. And about only thing I can do that's even kind of heavy is pull out of the rack. And, I know you're not in the same injury situation I am, but...
No, I'm glad you say that. I did tear a rotator cuff when I was competing, and I do have some kind of recurring knee pain. But there's a reason for that. It's because about a year ago, I took up this nasty little addiction called pickleball.
Yeah. But it's in your defense, it is very fashionable.
Yes, it is. It is fastest growing sport in the country. When I lived in Las Vegas, I lived on a park there. Some people might be familiar with, called Sunset Park, right near the airport. And they have a 26-court pickleball facility that's lighted from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. Okay. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my wife just brought home these little paddles and a ball, and we were playing in the driveway, and then some neighbors came over, and then some relatives, and we had little nets, and we were playing pickleball in our driveway. And I just kind of got addicted to it. Next thing you know, I'm out at this park playing challenge courts every single night. But what I found is that I had lost a lot of my athleticism, particularly my lateral movement, from just doing weightlifting. And so all this side-to-side movement, playing pickleball, it took me probably the better part of 6, I would say maybe even 9 months before I got over, before I was able to play without significant pain the next morning, just from the lateral movement, the ankles, the knees, the hips. It was pretty eye-opening. Even though I had been sprinting once a week on an overspeed treadmill, this type of lateral movement and the stops and starts. And now the better players don't have to run around as much. They tend to know where to be. They get there early and they use their battle skills. But me as a beginner,
and the better players don't weigh what you weigh.
No, that's another.
So
problem.
they don't have the mechanical load that you're carrying.
Well, and that's one thing. I started at 245 pounds when I started playing pickleball a year ago, and now I'm down to 223. I actually purposely dropped about almost 20 pounds, or a little over 20 pounds in the last year, just because I found that was just too much load. It did compromise my strength some, I'll be honest, which is frustrating for a guy who's built his entire identity around strength.
Right.
But I still tried to lift heavy where I could. Now, here's the revisions that I made in my training. I had to train a little less often because my bucket of fatigue was being filled with other activities. You have limited physical capital, and I was investing it in other places. And so I went from training each body part twice a week to training each body part once a week. So I was doing legs once a week now. And I had to find lower fatigue movements. And this is something that I've shared with clients for many years, even prior to pickleball, people who clients in their upper 40s and 50s who had historically lifted, maybe competitively even. They found that when they would go in and try and do the same exercises with the same loads, they would just be sore a lot of aches and pains. And so I tried to revise their training so that it was more enjoyable, so that it wasn't, because the best exercise is the one you'll do. And if they feel like they don't really want to go do the workout because they don't enjoy the workout because it hurts, then I started trying to design workouts. And one thing I put in there, and you're going to hate me for this, is I actually started using more of a box squat. I found that I had a lot less fatigue when I
Stan,
do a box
I want
squat.
to tell you a secret. That's
okay.
The only kind of squat I can do is a box squat right now. Because I can't subject this left knee to the deceleration of stretch reflex. I can't do it. So
exactly. Precisely.
I'm about an inch above parallel. I hate to say that, but I'm an inch above parallel. And I've just basically turned the squat into a hips movement without a lot of knee extension.
More vertical shin.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Just because that's the only thing I can do and still perform the movement pattern.
And you get all the benefits of the load for strength, for bone mineral density, for axial loading. You get all the benefit of the load, but you have reduced the impact. And what you said, and I don't want to get too technical about it, but it's the stretch reflex, the point at which you change directions at the bottom. And it's variable, as you know. Each rep is different in some degree of knee bend over toe, in some depth, and some
you
speed.
Can't control 100% of your position.
And the speed is another very important thing. I don't want to get too distracted here, but what you find is that as you age, that's one of the first things declines is your speed. People just don't do things fast. And there's a reason for that, is because those tendons they're like rubber bands, and when you start pulling them very fast and using the stretch reflex quickly, you create a whole lot more fatigue in that tendon. I like the heavier loads because we both know that the tendons need somewhat around or north of 70% of your 1RM to really be a tendon to be of tendon benefit. The lighter loads don't tend to transfer to the tendon benefit. Right. But you can add isometrics. A 30-plus second isometric does have tendon benefits, and less fatigue, and you can use a somewhat lighter weight. So I would introduce the box squat. I stopped doing things like bent rows and T-bar rows and started doing chest support rows. So I didn't have as much impact on my lumbar spine. And I just found that I was able to recover from those workouts much better than the previous workouts. I used some more machines. I would use a leg extension or leg press. I kind of alternate depending on how I felt that week, just to maintain my strength. Strength is specific, and so my squat did suffer from using alternate exercises if I wasn't squatting. But that's the recommendation I was making. And I was also, in the interest of time, and we've seen some research just recently come out showing us that when we superset antagonistic body parts, when I go in and do a lat pull down and a chest press, I do one, I rest a minute, do the other, and I go back and forth, I can finish a workout much faster and still get an equivalent hypertrophy result, presuming I'm getting sufficient rest between the two chest exercises. But I can slip in an antagonistic body part. So do a chest exercise, rest a minute, back exercise, rest a minute, chest exercise, rest a minute, back exercise, rest a minute. Right. And I do less total volume. I prefer progressing load over time rather than continuing to add sets and sets and sets.
Right. Same here.
At my age, I don't recover. If I do more than, I think the literature suggests once you get north of 6 sets for a particular muscle group in a given workout, a given body or a particular body part, say chest, you get significantly diminished returns, and you get kind of an exponential fatigue component associated with that workout. And I know there's been a lot of
I think
research.
The recent emphasis from the ex-phys community on hypertrophy through volume, that is so contrary to my experience, both personally and with the people I've trained for 40 years. That
I don't believe there is a consensus. I do see some very people I respect in the industry talking about these recent studies about 20, 30, 40 sets a week for particular body parts, showing, continuing to show some sort of linear, however that line looks. It's certainly not going to be a steep line, improvement. But I think that those studies are confounded by a couple of very important things. I think one, they're generally not experienced lifters, and we both know that as you become more experienced and you're able to recruit, you're able to lift more weight and utilize more CNS invested into a particular exercise, it takes you longer to recover. It's
just another expression of the novice effect. You can have novices do anything and they'll improve.
I think that's a component, and I think secondarily, I think a lot of these measurements were done on inflamed. They were done too close to completion of the task, and it's going to be influenced by water retention and inflammation. So I think both of those things influence it. And a third variable is that all of those studies, to my knowledge, had a progression. So what is credited for the continued improvement in hypertrophy? Is it the volume or the progression? And so I think there is some question as to the validity of those studies. And I just got to say, whether it was better or not, it wouldn't be meaningful enough to me to justify the fatigue and lack of recovery that I would experience. And so I'm still around 5 sets for chest in a given workout. And if I have to warm up quite a bit, and I have to get a good CNS stimulus so that my top sets are actually top sets. I talked about this recently. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Las Vegas with Hafthor, and we trained at my gym, Sin City Iron, there in Las Vegas. And I was talking to him about how when he does reps, for the longest time now, Strongman has had a lot of just top lifts, singles, huge, massive 1-rep lifts. And it seems that some of these competitions now are starting to introduce more repetitions. How many reps can you get at this particular weight? And the repetitions are getting north of 6, 8, 9 repetitions. When that happens, I think that the central nervous system will become the limiting factor, and we'd like to introduce what I think the terminology is post-activation potentiation, where you touch a heavy weight, and then the second time you touch it, it becomes it feels lighter.
Yes.
And so sometimes people will even do a little heavier. They'll go up to 110% of their reps weight and do a single, and then come back down to their reps weight to do their reps. And so I was talking to Hafthor about that. It's been my experience that when you, like if I get up to a top set, say I'm going to do leg extensions with the stack or something, and I want to get 10 reps, I'll do the stack for a single first and rest for a few minutes, and then I'll do my top set.
Because you disinhibited the movement pattern.
Yes. And
so
I
a lot of us have noticed that over the course of doing 3 sets of 5 across.
Yeah,
a lot of people
yeah.
will report that the second set of 5 is easier than the first set.
Yes, 100%.
It's just almost a
just
universal
experience.
observation.
Right. And so when I say I want to warm up my central nervous system, because I think that's the limiting factor for your top sets, I'm only going to do 2 top sets. So I need to be prepared to make sure those are actually top sets and they're not inhibited, as you said. And so I'll go around and do like a little circuit. I'll just do 1 rep of this, 1 rep of that, 1 rep of this, 1 rep of that, and then gradually repeat that circuit, slowly raising the weight for each set. And then I'll take my nice long rest, and then I will attack my 2 top sets of 2 different exercises with 1 finisher from an AMRAP maybe. And that's a workout for me, and I can blast through. And there's a reason I'm talking about all this, because the question was what would you tell the average person who doesn't compete? And the average person is concerned about how much time they have to spend in the gym, and what their return on investment is from that. Right. And my suggestion is that if you utilize antagonistic body parts and you only do about 4 top sets, that's 2 sets of 2 different exercises for that particular muscle, and maybe finish with an AMRAP of your favorite finisher, that is not only sufficient for maintenance, but that can stimulate I think equivalent growth as any other program. And as you progress to become a more experienced lifter, I think once a week is plenty of volume for that.
It certainly is. You and I had a conversation a while back about this, and it appears that you and I are both squatting once every 2 weeks.
Yes, even when I was competing in powerlifting, I would squat every other week, and I would deadlift on the alternate week.
That's what I do right now. That's what I do.
Too much weight, because we lift too close to our maximum.
Right. It's when you are no longer building your foundation, when you're using the foundation you have built over years and years of hard work in the gym. It's not productive to fail to realize that the novice gains have already been made.
Yes.
And now you're a different piece of physiology than you were 6 months after you started training. Things are different, and that has to be respected, or you are going to hurt yourself. And if you hurt yourself, you can't train.
Well, ultimately, that's what happens is when you, quote unquote, overtrain, is that you either hurt yourself or get sick, and so you build in your own deload.
Yeah, it is kind of self-limiting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And we talked about this program as with respect to the average person, but it's important to understand as a competitive athlete, say with John Jones, when we get into the last 3 months before his fight, we only need to touch a heavy weight for a couple of sets once a week to maintain that, what we call periodization, and maintain those off-season strength gains.
Right.
And it's some coaches try and get rid of that. They try and get rid of the strength training. Say mostly fight coaches, not strength coaches. And it's a bad idea.
People don't understand the value of force production. They seem to understand it in powerlifting, but they don't understand it in Olympic lifting, and they don't understand it in all the other sports that are fundamentally about force production. I don't understand why this is so complicated. I mean, it all comes down to force production. Everything you do that relates to either an opponent on the field or the field itself involves your production of force against that resistance. Doesn't matter if it's soccer or powerlifting. But the stronger you are, the better you're going to be at producing that force in the context of the competition.
Yeah, when coupled with your sport, so that you have the nervous system, the explosiveness. There's a coach out of Atlanta. I did a seminar at his gym many years ago. The website or the Instagram is Explosive Mechanics. Not sure if you've heard of that site or that the gentleman. His name escapes me right now. It's been years since we've spoken. If you go to @Explosive Mechanics on Instagram and you watch, His kids do box squats, heavy. He's got high school kids doing 585 box squats, aggressive box squats. And this was a straight bar. I generally use a SSB bar or a Kabuki bar because I can't shoulder a bar much without getting,
right.
It just bothers my shoulders
Sure.
and wrists and elbows. So, and they do weighted jumps. And these kids every year, probably half of the national champions in vertical jump are his kids that have 40, 42, 44-inch verts. These are high school kids. And when he does laser-timed 40-meter sprints or 40-yard sprint times, they don't run at all, which is not my recommendation. I think you should sprint once a week. But they don't do any, they certainly don't do any lateral drills or anything like that. They do the box squat and they do the jump, the weighted dumbbell jump. And if they can improve on the weighted dumbbell jump and the box squat, their 40-meter improves, their 40-yard dash improves. Usually 0.1 every month comes down, reduces down. And I found the same thing working with Matt Whittemer out of Beat Training in Cincinnati. He trains John Jones with me. We worked with Henry Cejudo together. He was a former NFL strength and conditioning coach under Buddy Morris. Of course, we know the infamous Buddy Morris, S&C Strength Coach of the Year, formerly for well, now he's with Arizona actually. And Matt does a lot of overspeed treadmill work, but he also does the strength training as well. And he's trained up to and including Olympic sprinters on getting faster, and a lot of it's like you say. There's a huge force production component in there that they never abandon.
It's interesting to me how modern strength and conditioning, quote unquote, has devolved into playing games in the floor with light weights on unstable surfaces.
You're going to get us to go there, aren't you? You're going to have all the functional pattern people in the comments.
These people are drawing a salary for no apparent reason.
It's painful to watch.
It
really
is.
Painful to watch.
It's very painful to watch it, and they hurt kids all the time. But the most painful aspect of the whole damn thing is the wasted potential.
Wasted potential. Yeah, like I said, you have limited physical capital. Now, maybe an experienced athlete could find that to be less stressful, and maybe a little GPP. But anything that's not measurable and progressible is
not training.
It's not training. It's exercise. And to claim that, and the problem with sports, like UFC fighting or football, is that the expression, their skill, will cloud any ability to assess the training as being responsible for the expression of that training onto the sport. Meaning that whether or not, crawling around on the floor, or I don't know what exercises they do, or doing tib raises, meaning that doing any of those things, you can't directly measure that as being responsible for the improvement in performance, if there was one, or the win or the loss. Because there's in football, there's other players. In skill sports, there's skill, and none of that was improved by these functional fitness fuckery that we're discussing.
Yeah.
The problem is that, and I just spoke to Lane Johnson about this recently because he was asking me, and this is a lot of athletes will ask me, what do you think about this? And I'm like, well, how do you measure it? And the problem is when you try and do what has been termed as sports-specific training, when you try and add load to a movement pattern that you might use on the field, you're not getting the best of either stimulus.
That's absolutely true. If you try to load a movement specific to the field, and part of that specificity being the amount of force that you're able to produce, throwing a baseball is a perfect example. A baseball is 4.5 ounces, and you're going to throw it from the pitcher's mound 60 foot 6 inches. Anything except that is not practice, and anything except that alters the mechanics of that movement pattern. Now, what do you want to practice? the precise mechanics you're going to use during the game, or some non-existent version of that proper mechanics that's involved in the actual performance competition. And I just don't understand how.
You have to be cautious in loading some of these movements that you don't interfere with the mechanics of the movement pattern. Give somebody a 10-pound basketball and ask them to shoot free throws, are they going to become a better free throw shooter? You have to be really careful about how you interfere.
How do you not see that that's stupid?
How
do you not see the injury potential?
Yes.
What is the injury potential involved in throwing a 6.5 ounce baseball as opposed to the standard 4.5 ounce baseball?
Yeah, you got to be careful, and you're training poor movement patterns at that point. Same reason I don't think that you should be. It happens in football all the time, where they'll do gassers and then they'll like try and do scrimmages. I don't think you should be performing at your game techniques, your sport specific work in a fatigue state. I think that you end up training bad movement patterns. I think that those athletes should be prime when they do that work.
You're going to train bad movement patterns, and in doing the bad movement patterns, you're going to get hurt.
And we know that's bad for speed. If you're more than 10% slower, you're not training speed anymore. It's time to go home. And to Louis' credit, he used to, if you set a PR, he would say, go home. You don't try and set another PR. You're done. The stimulus is sufficient.
Right.
Go recover. Come back another day.
Well, that's exactly right. Stan, I appreciate your being here today. This is, we need to talk more about these kind of things, because we learn a bunch of stuff every single time we talk to you. And I've learned things from you over the years just that haven't been on the podcast. And I appreciate you making time to do this with us today. And if it's all right with you, we'll come back and do it again soon. I don't want to go just drone on and on, because not everybody can watch a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast. So I don't know how they do that, but if we could come back and talk some more about this sort of thing, I would really enjoy it.
I appreciate that, and I think I think it's important to say that it's not my goal to come on and become some curmudgeonly old fart that shits on everybody else's program.
Well, it's never bothered me.
So. Good. I just know what works. I know what can't be proven.
Right.
and therefore is probably a waste of your time at this point. And I don't want people to waste their time.
Time is the variable that is the most precious, and few people realize that.
Yep.
Until one day you're laying in bed and you can't get out.
Part of it's about wasting time, but part of it's also, I call it the shiny object syndrome, about people chasing these hacks or these biohacks or these gimmicks, thinking that that's going to get them to the next level, and that's very discouraging.
It seldom is, or those things that you think would be are such clever ideas would already be being used, and they're not.
Yeah,
what we know works is you adding 5 pounds every workout to your squat until you can't do that anymore, and then doing something else until that doesn't work anymore, and then you do something else. That's how it works. That's how you get big and strong.
I've become a little bit. How do I term this? I don't like to force adaptations as much. I like to say that you don't necessarily add the weight to get stronger. You get stronger, and then you can add weight. I kind of sometimes will go into the gym and I don't put my linear progression. Eddie Cohn used to do this, and it's not shit on Eddie Cohn. He's a good friend of mine, and I learned a lot from him. But he used to have numbers that he would have to hit.
Right.
But he had a competition in 3 months.
Right.
If you don't have numbers you have to hit, and you don't have a competition, then my goal would be to take what your body gives you, go into the workout, and start lifting and start increasing your weight and your load and see how it moves and feel how it moves. And if a lighter weight moves fast, then do the heavier weight. But if you lift a heavier weight slower, did you get stronger? And that might not be the case. And so I kind of use my warm-up sets or my second to last set as an indicator. If it feels good that day, I'm going for it. If it doesn't, you don't have to force that. Wait till the next workout. Maybe sleep was a problem. Maybe nutrition was a problem. Maybe hydration. Maybe you had some stress, whatever. You don't have to force it that workout. It may even be detrimental to try to do so because, at least psychologically speaking, if you miss the lift.
I would agree with that for more advanced lifters, but a kid that's only been training 9 months, he hasn't got enough experience to be. He's not entitled to an opinion about that.
No.
And what he needs to do is what has worked before, which was adding the 5 pounds. And if you add 5 pounds for 3 sets of 5 and you move it, then you have in fact gotten stronger because the weight went up, and that's what strength is.
That's a good example. We get plenty of parents that come into us, and I had to quote my buddy Matt. He said, lots of times they'll come in, they'll tell you about this program they got their kid on. He said, sounds like you're doing a little bit of everything and a whole lot of nothing. He said, this kid needs 20 more pounds of muscle before he's ever even going to be able to compete at that level.
Well, we'll talk about that next time. That's
okay.
I think we've got some disagreement on that, but that'll be fun to discuss. Stan Efferding has been our guest today. Stan, thank you. I hope you're enjoying your island paradise out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And now that the atomic bomb testing has subsided, I'm not worried about you at all.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm
all right, man.
Here, and look forward to talking to you again.
Okay, Stan, thank you very much for being with us. And thank you for joining us this week on Starting Strength Radio.